Hello everyone, my name is Nicolas Belmonte, and today I'm going to be talking about hacking public-facing data visualizations at Twitter. So, a few words about me. I am a technical lead at Twitter on the data visualization area. I work for the Visual Insights team, which is part of the analytics team. And we do visual exploratory data analysis, but also we focus on kind of like public-facing events and like ways to show Twitter data around these events. Before joining Twitter, I worked a lot on hobby projects, open source projects to do data visualization. On the left, you can see one that's called the JavaScript InfoVis Toolkit. It's a framework or a toolkit to create visualizations out of like hierarchies and graphs. So I kind of like was really interested in trying to visualize in different ways these sort of data structures, and so I sort of like reverse engineered a lot of the papers that had different techniques to visualize trees and graphs. And that is open source. It was a hobby project, or is a hobby project, and I was really happy to see that a lot of different organizations use this. Google, Mozilla, the White House website, as well as NASA. And then I also worked a bit at Sencha, which is a company that does UI frameworks, so basically visual stuff with JavaScript. And I developed this framework, which is a thin layer on top of WebGL, which is called PhiloGL. So WebGL is this new technology. Well, it's not new, but it's new for the browser, which is an API to create 3D hardware-accelerated graphics in the browser. So we also use that a lot at Twitter to do data viz for different events. And finally, I am leading the project of like interactive.twitter.com, which is a cross-functional effort to do data visualizations around public events. So we work with the communications team, the marketing team, and also sometimes with the brand strategy and sales teams, along with the analytics team, and to try to create these sort of like stories and visual narratives. Yeah, and a fun fact about me is I did the data visualization that was shipped with the S1 at Twitter, which is the S1 filing is the filing for the IPO of the company, and they wanted to visualize the reach for the 4 more years tweet, which is the tweet Obama made for the re-election. And so the tweet was retweeted 800,000 times, reaching 25 million people, but we only had 3 days to visualize it. So this is the stuff I came up with. So the title for the talk was like how we do data visualization at Twitter, which is, I believe, kind of like a lame title. So I changed it a bit. I started with hacking public-facing visualizations, because true fact is that before joining Twitter, most of the visualizations I used to do was like visual exploratory data analysis. I already knew my audience. It was a very geeky audience. It was people that already knew about data visualization, or people that knew about programming, or they knew about the subject I was doing the visualization for, right? So in this setting, I started, try to think more broadly about the audience. But there's another fact I added at Twitter, and this is because not because the processes we use to create data visualizations, but actually most about the special nature about the data set we have, which is basically what's related to the platform, right? So we have something that's global. We've been called many times the pulse of the planet, right? So you may have seen charts that show huge correlation in tweets with when people go to sleep or when they wake up. You can see huge correlations in tweets when somebody scores a goal during the World Cup, or when right before somebody's going to kick do a penalty kick. So we have this sort of like, well, exactly, like we're kind of like the pulse of the planet in a sense, right? But then we also have the nature of the fact that we're real time. And this aspect is very important, especially for social networks, right? How to visualize this. This poses a lot of new challenges. And finally, we're conversational. You could extract, if you just think about the text of the tweet, we do have some sort of like structure in it, right? We do have the @mentions, we do have the hashtags, which are like channels or ways to communicate between people. And that's only on the structure side. On the non-structure, you could do name entity recognition, you could do topic analysis, and this is only with the text. You could also think about retweets, impressions, favorings, requests, geolocation data, etc. So there's a huge data set, and we're facing the opposite problem, right? It's not like we don't have enough data to tell stories, that we have a lot of data and now we don't know what to do with it. So on these 3 different aspects of the platform, we did a whole bunch of different data visualizations for public-facing events. And so I'd like to kind of dissect these examples and to show you how the process works at Twitter and how we built these visualizations. So on the first topic, which is kind of like global, right? I think that this example kind of matches that. And it's, we focus around on different verticals, right? So we focus on news, on government, on sports, on TV, stuff like that. This one in particular was for the World Cup. It is global because we do have 32 countries which are competing during the World Cup, and also a lot other countries which are actually mentioning different things that happen during the World Cup. So we released this new feature during the World Cup, which are hash flags, which is, you use a hashtag with a 3-letter country code, and then you see kind of like a flag in your tweet. And it's a really small detail, but it grew a lot of engagement. Like, people started tweeting hash flags all the time. Like, you'd see, tweets with like hundreds of, well, I don't know if hundreds, but 140 divided by 3 hash flags, all over the place. And actually, it was so engaging that when we took hash flags out, people were really complaining to the platform, like, this is not working. I'm sending a hash flag and I can't see any flags, and it's like, the World Cup is over. So anyway, so we started analyzing this information of countries mentioning other countries through hash flags. So for example, here in this viz, you have at the center is Brazil, right? And on the left is mentions of Brazil. What are the top countries mentioning Brazil through hash flags? And so you can see Chile, Mexico, and Japan. And then what are the top countries being mentioned by Brazil on the right? And so you have Germany, of course, the spectacular match of Germany versus Brazil. Then you have Argentina, which is like kind of like the arch rivals of Brazil. And then you have Netherlands and so on. And so this was more like a kind of like an exploratory tool, right? Like let's explore, different mentions for these countries. And we started seeing a lot of interesting patterns emerge. So for example, if you focus on the USA and you look on the right, you see that, a lot of people are actually rooting for Mexico in the USA. So you don't have just one voice in the USA, but you have all these different communities. And a lot of people are actually living in the USA that are rooting for Mexico. So you have this emergent like kind of immigration patterns. If you look at France, for example, you may see the same thing. Like the top most mentioned country from France is Algeria. So a lot of people were actually rooting for Algeria in France. And then you can see a lot of other patterns. But so you can see, for example, geographical patterns. For example, Croatia mentioning Bosnia and Herzegovina a lot, and then Bosnia and Herzegovina in turn like mentioning Croatia. So you have this sort of like loop, probably based on proximity. And so we started finding these stories, but we could only find these stories from an exploratory tool. Then at the bottom visualization, we have this day-by-day breakdown of hash flag mentions. So on the x-axis, we have time. On the y-axis, we have percentage of uses for that specific hash flag. So for example, let's see the US. Let's see, sorry, Iran. So here, for example, we started seeing some sort of anomaly, right? Like Iran is mentioning the USA a whole lot, right? Either they're really fans of the USA or something else is happening. And actually, what we can see here is that at the top of the viz, we have the group stage days, so days which are World Cup days in which like the teams are actually playing. But then we have days in which the teams are not playing, which are, for example, these 2 days, which are in between the round of 16 and the quarterfinals. And so here you can see that there are a lot more mentions of the USA when there isn't any actually like World Cup match than during the World Cup. So this means that actually Iran is talking a lot more about the USA just in any regular day than during the USA matches, soccer matches. You can actually drill down this and see the exact percentages for all the different hash flags. So this is more of a geeky thing, but we do know that sports people are very geeky. In general, they love stats related to sports. So we shipped this, and it was really well received. And it did show that a lot of interesting patterns, like regular humanity patterns, like immigration and stuff like that, emerged out of just looking at Twitter data. So on the visual display, just a few words on this. So that bottom viz is kind of confusing at the beginning, right? So you have the time on the x-axis, but why not just use the stacked bar chart for the y-axis? Well, the issue with this is that for certain days, like July 3rd or 2nd or like June 27th, for example, you cannot actually read anything. And the problem with this is that you're encoding total amount of tweets per day on the y-axis. And so this is actually compressing a lot the bars, and you cannot see the actual mentions there. So one thing we did is first of all, remove the absolute values. Remove the encoding on the y-axis for the absolute number of tweets per day. So that will give you a relative chart, a percentage chart, like every day sums up to 100%. But then how do we encode the total volume of tweets per day? Well, we use the x-axis. So first step, remove the y encoding. And then second step, use the x-axis for the total tweets per day. So now we're using a space filling visualization. This is more space effective. Now you can see on every day, you can see what is the proportion of tweets for each hash flag. By the way, this layout is not like a new layout. This is a tree map slice and dice layout. This visualization, the top part, looks very intuitive in a sense, at least for people who read from left to right. We actually didn't do any analysis for people writing from right to left, because this feels natural because it starts from the left. But we should do more analysis on this. But actually, this came up after a lot of different iterations. And so this is one of the key things I want to say, and that's super important when you're building public-facing data visualizations. Try to iterate, try to get user feedback. And the first version we had for this was actually pretty horrible. It's the top one. So I was super excited by this version because this compressed the entire menu of all the countries and the top viz in just one viz. So I was like, oh, this is really space efficient. But then, so the top countries are the countries that will be mentioning the bottom countries. So for example, Mexico is mentioning Netherlands and some other country. And then you have the USA is mentioning Mexico. So I read this paper by Van Wyk that said that the best way to encode directionality in edges was by using this sort of triangle shape. And so I implemented this, and I was like, oh, this should be super readable. And then we sent this to some users, and they were like, I don't get this. You should redo this. And so I started simplifying this a lot more. And so I think I went a bit over simplifying the visualization. I ended up having two different bar charts. The mentions of Brazil, sorted by countries mentioning Brazil, and then the mentions by Brazil. So it mentions countries mentioned by Brazil on the right side. But this doesn't show any connection, doesn't really show any flow or anything. So it was actually more confusing than before. And so that's why we ended up with the third option. So for the real-time aspect of the platform, it's kind of complicated to do that. First of all, because it's kind of it happens, and then you cannot actually go back. For most of the time, you generally just see geolocated real-time visualizations happening in some planet, but then you cannot go back, or you cannot actually replay the event or see any patterns in that. So I think that this example fits really well the real-time aspect of trying to enhance something, in this case a transcript for the State of the Union address, to provide some extra contextual information and to actually guide the user through the transcript itself. So for the ones who don't know, the State of the Union address happens once a year in the US, and it's just like the president making a speech about the State of the Union. What we did here is we took the transcript for the State of the Union address, and for each paragraph, we took tweets that were happening during the mention of that paragraph by the president. So basically, we have different time buckets, and we get tweets on these time buckets, and then we perform a topic analysis on these tweets to see like what are the topics being mentioned by these people. And so what you can see at the top is a stream graph of minute-by-minute conversations on Twitter for during the address. These are only tweets that have been mentioning the State of the Union, right? And this is not only just, this is really good as a summary because it provides some sort of like at-a-glance kind of information, right, that you're seeing. As it was mentioned with the previous presentation, like people are really like on Twitter, they're like, just seeing Twitter on their phones, like in the Muni or in the Metro or whatever, and they just like click on the viz and they have like 5 seconds to be, interested in this. Otherwise, they will just go to some other page. And so this provides a really good kind of summary of what happened during the address, or at least what was discussed on Twitter during the address. But it's not only a summary, it's also an index, right? So if a person is not really interested in energy and probably she doesn't want to read about like, anything related to energy, then she can probably just go and click in fairness if she's interested in fairness, and that will take her to the actual paragraph that was mentioning these things, or where this was discussed on Twitter. On the right, we have a breakdown of the tweets. So depending on the paragraph, the visualization on the right will show you what is the topic most being mentioned during this paragraph. And on the top, it will show what is the geographic breakdown for those tweets. So are people in California more interested in fairness than people in New York? And so you can kind of really see the real-time aspect of that. You can replay the actual transcript with tweets. And in this way, you're kind of enhancing the transcript. So on the data collection side, we took the transcript of the address. We annotated paragraph by paragraph with timestamps. We took tweets with hashtag State of the Union sent during the address. We performed the matching of these tweets with the paragraphs, and then we generated a topic analysis in the tweet text. Finally, we did provide some geographic breakdown of this. So the first iteration, we actually didn't know we were going to have the transcript before the address. So the only way to add timestamps on this transcript is if you get the actual transcript before the president reads the transcript. And props to the government team for that. So since we didn't know we were going to have the transcript, we just did this horrible first iteration, basically, in which we had every row was a minute, and every column is a state. And so we chose this kind of like coloring coding to choose like the volume of tweets being sent by each state during the address. On the right, if you hover on a specific circle, we would show a quote that happened during that minute by the president, and then we would just, instead of doing topic analysis, just like count word frequency in tweets and then show special keywords for that. So for example, in this example, I'm hovering the first minutes. So the main keywords are like Obama, President, State Union, watching, watch, which means I just got here and watching the State of the Union. So on the second iteration, we were told we were going to have the transcript, but we didn't have it at this time. So what I did is I just took the transcript from 2013 State of the Union address, and I did the analysis on this. I did a topic analysis and the geographic breakdown for 2013. And this is a thing that's also pretty interesting if you're doing like stuff for public-facing events, is that in general these events are periodical. So like the Emmys, the VMAs, the State of the Union, like the World Cup. Well, World Cup, it's like spaced out of 4 years, so probably in 2010 Twitter didn't have that much realistic data to replay this viz. But for the State of the Union, most definitely you can use it. And so we just took the tweets from the 2013 State of the Union address to do this. Finally, we wanted some sort of like summary at-a-glance information being shown. I played with all the different permutations of time series that we can find, and the most interesting one was a stream graph. So we ended up with stream graphs. it's an interesting thing to see that we also get some extra time to maybe write a paper or do some actual research after we publish our work. I wrote a 2-pager for IEEE Viz, which was accepted for a poster submission, so I'll be there in November. Finally, on the third aspect, we have the conversational aspect, right? So we had global pulse of the planet, like real time. How can we replay an event through Twitter? And how can we show conversation about a specific topic on Twitter? And so I think that this example on the vertical of news is pretty interesting. It actually happened without it being planned. This was after the typhoon Haiyan happened in the Philippines, and I was just like reading my timeline, and everybody was saying, help the Philippines, like, and I was really overwhelmed or really impressed to see like all these different tweets. So I was like, okay, I want to see like where they come from. I started doing like some ad hoc like research to see like where these tweets were coming from. And when you're doing new stuff, like I guess that the two main key points are that first of all, you need to act fast, because otherwise, news is new, and if you do it like a month later, then probably nobody will care. And secondly, you need to be mindful, and you need to like show the information in a way that's like neutral, or at least like, not trying to say something else. So how this viz works basically is we put the Philippines in the center, and then we draw a line for each place that's mentioning Philippines and help in a tweet. I did this JavaScript implementation of an algorithm called multi-level agglomerative edge bundling, which creates bundles of edges. Basically, it organically creates clusters of edges. So in this case, for example, all these edges are being clustered in a bundle. And how the algorithm works is basically very simple. As it works as an electrician will put cables together to just like save space. So this algorithm works like that. So if you focus on a specific area, you can see tweets by engagement, sorted by engagement on the event. And so thoughts and prayers continue to be with the people of the Philippines. If you zoom into a different area, you can see tweets, most relevant tweets around that area mentioning this. And if you scroll down, you can see it's kind of like almost reading what happened on Twitter, like what was people talking about when this happened. So kind of like an overview, but it really shows the conversation around the event, and it shows that there were like a lot of tweets mentioning this. So on the data collections, this was pretty easy, pretty straightforward actually. Just take geolocated tweets, filter text containing Philippines and help in as much languages as you can, given the little time that you have. So in this case, it was 22 languages. Apply the clustering on the edges. We implemented the mingle algorithm in JavaScript. And finally, sort tweets by relevance. So on the visual display, we started with a equirectangular map projection. Small detail, we put the Philippines in the center. It's a small, but I think it's an interesting detail. Just draw straight lines from the points to the Philippines. And then this looks kind of messy, so run this algorithm to make it look a bit more elegant, use less ink, be more readable. Then use a categorical color palette to show the bundles, to show the different clusters, which actually happen to map with the continents. And then this paper goes as far as this, and this was the straight implementation of the paper. But actually, it's an awesome paper, but it lacks a few things on handling like weighted bundles. So actually, you don't all lines get collapsed into just one single line. So I extended this paper with the fact of like being able to show like weight in the edges, and so now you can see much better like how many tweets are coming from where actually. And so this was done by adding a margin to the edges, and so we open source this. It's called improved edge rendering, and so you can play with the different parameters here. So for example, you can say let's have 24, 25 neighbors. So neighbors are the number of edges you want to collapse together, right? This is the margin argument that you can change that shows the different spacing in the bundles, right? So you can play a bit with, for example, the delta. This is the interpolation from straight edges to bundled edges, or you can change the shape of the curve. So the curve is a piecewise Bezier curve, and you can change that to be just a straight polyline curve or anything in between. So here is just a straight polyline, and here you see it more smooth and being a Bezier curve. Finally, you can play a bit with the color. So you can change the solid color, but you can also color by cluster, as I showed before. Now let's say I color by direction. So in this case, we have edges that go from blue to red, and that encodes direction in the edges. So in this case, it's kind of complicated actually to see how many links are going from one place to the other and kind of count the volume of that. So what we did is to apply the sorting function when you create the bundle, so that you can sort all the edges going from one end to the other on one side and vice versa. And so the result is a bit better. So for example, in this case, you can see that half of the edges are going from one place to the other in South America to the Philippines and vice versa. So this is all open source. You can go to github.com/phylogb/mingle. And this was also thanks to Twitter to give me the time to open source this and to have it on my repo. So a little bit on the implementation side. This uses a lot of web standards. How do we work with web standards at Twitter? So we use Yeoman. So how many of you know about Yeoman? Of course you do. So Yeoman, it's a workflow to build static sites using web technologies. This workflow consists of 3 different things. It's Yo, which is a scaffolding. It's a library to create scaffolding for static sites. So basically, if you do Yo interactive or Yo website or Yo web app, etc., it will scaffold an entire site for you with folders to put images in, folders to put JavaScript files, etc., etc. The second thing, it's a build system. So here we use Grunt, but you can use Grunt or Gulp, I think are the 2 choices. And with this, you can create tasks to concatenate, compress JavaScript files or obfuscate JavaScript files, or you can create, compile Sass or less files into CSS files, or just compress HTML files, or do other stuff. The other stuff we do is specific tasks to fetch tweets or fetch images from tweets, or do a data transform phase in which we take the CSV or TSV data from HDFS and we map that into JSON data, for example. And finally, the third step is package managing, basically. So what we use here is Bower. And so basically it's I want D3 in my project. Instead of just going to d3js.org and then finding the last version of D3 and then downloading the file and putting it in my project, I just do Bower install D3 and it will be my project. And so for this, you can have different choices, right? You can say, I want to use 2D Canvas, I want to use WebGL, I want to use SVG, and so that will pull up the libraries for you. On the libraries we use, I just mentioned all of them, I think. So we use D3 for everything that's SVG related. For 2D Canvas, we use a lot the raw 2D Canvas API or JavaScript InfoVis Toolkit. And for WebGL, we use either 3JS or PhyloGL. So on how to choose the right web standard for my visualization. This is, I think, a very important thing. And I'd say that the first thing is just forget about everything else and first think about your visual component. So in this case, let's say, for example, I want to render a bar graph, a bar chart, and a choropleth map. And so now dissect these visual components into different properties you'd like them to have. So for example, how many elements does my bar chart have? Well, 40 elements. That's pretty small for having to render that on a browser, even a mobile browser today. That's fairly small. Same for the choropleth map, right? You have about 50 states, so that's just 50 elements in the DOM tree. So what's the shape complexity? That could be another interesting question. So for example, shape complexity for the bar chart is just rectangles, right? So that's something that you can easily handle with HTML. No use of SVG required for this. Whereas the choropleth map has pretty complex shapes, right? It has concave, convex, connected, and disconnected states. And so for this, you're going to need more like a more complex language. And so in this case, SVG is a good choice. Finally, do you want these components to be interactive? Yes. Well, so if you use DOM-based techniques like HTML and SVG, this is really good for you because you can actually inspect the element, you can debug the element, you can add listeners to the element. You don't really have to rebuild the entire event system from scratch. And so based on these criteria, you can choose like whether to use HTML or SVG. There are other criteria like, will this work for mobile, or will this work for print, or do I have to make this accessible, or do I really need an event system, or is there any library that can help me build this without me having to worry about anything else? And so there are a lot of different questions you can ask about this, but I would just recommend to start with the visual component first and then ask all these questions later. And WebGL, when is it interesting to choose WebGL? Is it one of the criteria could be when you're having to visualize a lot of elements, right? Like 5,000 to 10,000 elements, maybe a WebGL is a good idea. The other interesting thing is the cool factor. So when you're using WebGL, you can use 3D visualizations, do more flashy stuff. Flashy stuff, it's maybe not as good for like the news vertical, but it's definitely good for sales and brand strategy stuff. And so that's what we used it for. So for example, this first viz shows the reach of an organic tweet on Twitter. So this reaches geographically about the whole planet, but it also has 300,000 impressions. If you compare this to a promoted tweet that has 5 million impressions, that's pretty amazing. That's a 12x increase of impressions, which is amazing. But it's even more amazing if you put this 3D globe next to that. Another thing is like you can use it for storytelling as well. So in this case, we were there you go. In this case, we were analyzing mentions of Ian McKellen, Sir Patrick Stewart, and mentions of both VITs through time. So the yellow dots are the important thing here. We want to show up how these interactions grew with time. And so we can see like a pretty big cluster of mentions of these two people there. And this actually correlated with the New York City trip they did together. They actually started doing a lot of taking a lot of pictures together, and they started like interacting more together. So you can see this in the mentions. But also you can see a lot of growth of interactions towards like the present. And this happened because you have the latest X-Men movies that was going out. And so we can show these also through this visualization. So more of an exploratory thing is something that was actually shown at Cannes by our director of brand strategy. It's like a visualization that shows this story. And finally, we can use this for interactive stuff. This is an implementation I made of using PhiloGL of a globe showing geolocated tweets, which you can zoom in and out. You can control this with multi-touch events, and you can show a timeline. For example, in this was used at South by Southwest, so you can swipe through tweets. This is all using like web standards, CSS 3D transforms, and WebGL on the left. And you can see how the two visualizations are being linked to each other. So when you tap somewhere, it will go somewhere else on the globe view. And finally, we have the globe to plane view kind of switch. And so this was really engaging for people. So when you already know the piece of hardware you're going to be using, and it supports WebGL, and it's only that box that's going to be using it, then you can go crazy and do all these different things. So with that, some of the key takeaways are the audience. So first of all, I talked about like iterating. So that's something you should definitely do no matter what vertical you focus on. Iterate. If you can grab somebody from the audience and then show the viz to him first, and get the feedback from that person, and then try to iterate from that, that would be awesome. If you can't, then try to grab anybody around you and show them that viz. But then other of the interesting things about the audience is that it determines the verticals you need to focus on, right? So for example, you may say, okay, if I focus on news, then all the news people will look at this. But then we created these verticals based on the audience from start, right? So we have this sort of feedback loop. The audience also determines the data you need to focus on. You need to ask the right questions for the right people. It also determines the type of the visualization you're building, whether it's like an exploratory thing, because they're like really geeky people. They like a lot about, they know a lot about sports, for example, stats and stuff like that, or expository, explanatory viz. Like, I'm reading an article, I want to see this viz, but it's just like an add-on to the actual text I'm reading. It also determines the tone of the visualization. Should I be sound at least insightful? Should I sound playful? Should I be storytelling? And finally, the implementation, right? Like, we have a lot of users at Twitter who use their mobile phone. We should be probably mobile friendly. We should choose, scalable vector graphics if we're going for print, or Canvas and WebGL if we want to go crazy with these last examples I showed you. And that's my Twitter handle. At the bottom is the page where we publish all our interactives. And yeah, thanks.
It's following on from the ex-Guardian folks. I guess I was just thinking that you're not a news media organization. How do you decide which stories you'll pick up on, like the State of the Union thing? What's the decision-making process as to what you're gonna cover?
Well, that's funny because I actually work with Simon Rogers on that, which is a former Guardian person. Which is now the data editor on the communications team. But we do have people focusing on different verticals, right? And we, as I said before, it's a cross team effort. So we have media folks, communication folks, and the analytics people. And for recurrent events like the State of the Union address, this is something that's discussed a lot on Twitter. So we know it's going to be big. So we should probably try to show something with that data. And for those events, it's kind of easy to work with because we have previous year's data. For some events like, the Typhoon, Haiyan, that's more of like, that's more of like, me exploring the data and finding that there's an interesting story to tell maybe with this and running this through comms and then comms approving and then having this be out. So it depends. Like some things we really plan ahead a lot and some things just happen.
It looks very nice. What sort of stage is this work at? Are you sort of thinking of proof of concept that you have all this data floating around on Twitter and you can produce interesting visualizations from it and you've put these nice examples up for people to look at? Where's it going from here? What's the next stage, do you think?
So all the stuff that's on interactive.twitter.com is already published and it's part of a blog post in general. So there is a story around that and this is kind of like the interactive side of the story. For other things, for example, when we work with brand strategy and sales, it's like I need some amazing slides to show these to people. And so it's like global sales conference. Let's show these impressions globe. It's the Cannes Lion presentation. Let's show these like interactions between Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Or we are going to South by Southwest or CES. And so these people really like to be involved with like technology and stuff like that. So we create these sort of like interesting, immersive like experiences.
So you're using the visualization as an advert for the mountain of data you've accumulated?
I'm sorry?
You're using the visualization to advertise the amount of data that you have access to, is that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not only about advertising. I think that people really are engaged with this. I think that the message is like, it's like, here are some clever or interesting uses of our data. And then maybe they get hooked with this and they want to use our data to do other stuff. So it's like to wake their imagination in some sense. Yep. Thank you.